Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Gaming video we're going to be discussing all things Intel related, specifically a couple of pieces of news which have popped up over the past 24 or so hours. The first of which is a Coffee Lake screenshot from CPU-Z, which shows us some interesting information concerning the upcoming processor, and then we're going to move over to Intel's next legal battle. Yup, that's right, Intel are at it again. This time, Intel accuse Qualcomm of having a monopoly in the CPU arena when it comes to smartphones. Yes, that one, I see the irony as well. But first things first, Coffee Lake. So just to give you the too long didn't read, for those who don't know, Coffee Lake is the successor to Kaby Lake, which of course was the successor to Skylake. While there are a couple of inherent differences in the architecture, especially when it comes to I/O and a few other bits and pieces, primarily the difference that I think a lot of people are going to be interested in is the number of cores, which pushes the number of cores and threads up substantially from the older models. As you probably are aware, Kaby Lake, for example, on the mainstream platforms has 4 cores, 8 threads, which has been prevalent from Haswell and even other CPUs before, even Sandy Bridge. But Coffee Lake is turning this on the head and is pushing up to 6 cores and 12 threads for the higher i7 models. So there have been some earlier rumours from CPC hardware, and it suggests that the i7-8700K would feature a base frequency of 3.7 GHz, with the i5-8600 having a frequency of 3.6. But this image, which has popped up from X-Fastest and has soon been doing the rounds on the internet, as it tends to do. By the way, as far as I'm aware, the original source has now been nuked, unfortunately. But, you know, that's not surprising. I'm going to imagine Intel and other people are not too happy this is leaked, but still. Anyway, the CPU screenshot shows that it is, of course, running the name of Coffee Lake, unsurprising. Max TDP is 80 watts, which is definitely lower than the 8700K, which, at least to my knowledge, is being reported at 95 watts. Socket 1151, no surprises there, along with 14 nm. The primary things we should note is the core speed, which is showing as 3890, so basically 3900 MHz, because the multiplier is 39. Bus speed is showing at 99.78, so that's where the discrepancy begins. Cache is pretty much what has been reported so far on the processors. We have 12 megabytes of 16-way level 3 cache, whereas we have, of course, level 1 data, level 1 instructions at 32 kilobytes, and there's something wrong with the level 2, but it looks like everything is basically identical to what the leaks have been pointing to previously. The other thing is this is definitely an engineering sample. It even says so right there, 3.5 gigahertz ES. So obviously this is probably a different SKU, or it's just not running up to snuff, it's not at full speed. For those who don't know the earlier rumors, I'll quickly go over a couple of the highlights. What's very interesting is that i5s are not going to, at least according to the rumors from CPC hardware, only have 4 cores. Indeed, it would appear that Intel are taking Ryzen a lot more seriously than perhaps it's saying on the outside. It looks like even i5s are going to have 6 cores, which to me is definitely a bonus. It looks like Intel are definitely moving away from the mainstream norm. Now, I like this from 2 perspectives. One, because, well, I don't want Intel to be way behind on the core count, and for basically people to have the choice between more cores but slower single thread performance, or, well, the reverse. So Intel and AMD. I kind of prefer both companies to have different merits, but it's also good for both companies to be pushing each other. The other reason is because if the number of cores in the mainstream go up, rather obviously games developers, or developers as a whole, whether it be for games, whether it be for other applications, are obviously going to code their titles for a wider range of hardware. And we possibly will start seeing games on the PC platform take advantage of more threads, more cores, which is definitely a positive. So there will be a couple of different i7s apparently, but as I said, the top of the line is going to be the 8700K, which will have a base frequency of 3.7 GHz. That's with 12 threads total. And supposedly there's also going to be an 8700 non-K, but that has a base frequency of just 3.2 GHz. So maybe this is the CPU that we're seeing here. since one can definitely see that it has 6 cores, 12 threads, and obviously it does say i7 anyway, so it's pretty obvious to anyone that, well, this is not an i5 CPU. So, this is one of those things you couldn't really make up, and I'd like to thank a viewer for sending this over to me, Joe. So basically, Intel are accusing... I'm sorry, this is just so amazing. It's pretty... this is one of those things where you really could write headlines like this, like for troll posts. It's pretty impossible. But basically, the too long didn't read is Intel are accusing Qualcomm of abusing its mobile chip monopoly. Now, I've got to admit, it's actually taken me a lot of composure to not just burst out laughing, because when I actually first read this, I was done like for a good couple of minutes. I was almost in tears of laughter. Not because I have anything against Intel, I just want to make that clear. But when it comes to companies like this, Intel are not exactly. You know what this strikes me of? It's kind of like, you know, the school bully, and the school bully gets pushed over by another kid, and then it goes running to the teacher and it's like, you know, Miss, I got knocked over by Bob over there. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. Now, with that said, I'm not against Intel in these filings, because obviously, well, some of what they're saying is technically true, but, well, there you go. Anyway, I'm going to read out a few of the pertinent sections because it's pretty lengthy, as you'd expect in legal cases. But on Thursday, Intel provided standalone remarks of Apple versus Qualcomm wireless chip debate and said that through a host of anti-competitive practices, not through the merits of its products or the strength of its innovation, and also it believes that Qualcomm is in breach of its obligations to license standard essential patents to competitors. And indeed, Intel claim that it forecloses rivals like Intel from competing on Apple's vital business. Apple's decision to resist Qualcomm's anti-competitive behaviour is the leading edge of a growing resistance to Qualcomm and its interlocking web of abusive practices. Not coincidentally, they continue, Qualcomm has targeted Apple here in retribution for daring to contract with Apple's only remaining competitor and for bringing a lawsuit to challenge Qualcomm's anti-competitive products. Now, don't forget, Apple have already started a lawsuit against Qualcomm. How much for? $1 million? Couple $100 million? No, $1 billion US. And the reason behind that is because of abusing its market practices and dominance to obtain unfair royalties. So, currently Qualcomm seem to be upsetting many individuals. According to Don Rosenberg, who is the general counsel over at Qualcomm, this is a pretty straightforward case. We've got 6 patents which we're confident they are infringing. They are referring to Apple in this instance. And we are very obviously concerned about the fact that Apple is unilaterally decided they don't have to pay for property it takes and uses. End quote. Oh dear. There's multiple things I could say in this instance, and quite frankly, I bear repetition of things I've said in similar cases, but I'm going to give you the quick too long didn't read. I'm not surprised Qualcomm are doing this, unfortunately, and honestly we're going to have to just wait and see how the legal case goes. The problem is each company in many instances is responsible or have done this type of thing previously. You've got Nvidia versus Samsung. We all know how that went. In fact, Nvidia have sold multiple people, Samsung probably being the most obvious and notorious. Apple and its constant legal battles with AMD in multiple instances. In fact, just some point in 2014, I think it was around, I don't know, midpoint, maybe June, July, August, something like that, Intel had a massive fine in Europe for damaging practices against AMD. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was around $1.5 billion US. This is not small numbers, and that's insane. I will put that information into the video though, but that's absolutely just bonkers. And it's just kind of how it is in the tech industry. And here's the thing, it's weird, like, honestly, I could make a 4-hour video on this topic alone, because it's so complex. Like, if you were to look at Intel versus AMD, and I don't mean here in the, oh look, this one's doing better in Cinebench, this one's doing better in games, blah. No, I'm referring to actually how each company work and the basic synopsis. I'm very quickly boiling this down because I don't want this to be a really long video. But too long didn't read. You have Intel, who basically license x86 to AMD. So without that, AMD is screwed. They can't produce x86 chips. Then you've got Intel, who are essentially borrowing the technology of x64 from AMD. They're basically licensing that. So you've got this really weird thing where both companies are basically relying upon one another to create this technology. And it gets even more complex and more weird if you go into GPU industry, because you've got this really weird area where, forget games developers, where they're creating new technologies like, I don't know, various scaling technologies and shadow technologies and, you know, whatever for game engines. But I'm talking about basics like, you know, new APIs and you know, debuggers and all of this stuff. So you've got AMD, Nvidia, you've got all of these different companies working together. Even Apple, you've got Intel, all these companies working together to create technologies in new APIs like Vulkan, like DirectX 12, or other industry standards. And obviously industry standards are kind of important. This is very much the issue you have as well with virtual reality, because let's imagine just for a second that you start to say, well, okay, you have a mouse, but this mouse will only work in this game. Imagine that. It just doesn't make sense, right? You just couldn't do that. So imagine if you've got a Razer mouse and someone else has, let's say, a Samsung mouse or a Microsoft mouse or whatever. Well, you can't play Quake because you've got a Razer mouse, but don't worry, you can play Fallout because that engine was licensed with that game. It just becomes absolutely just weird. And that's one of the problems we've got when it comes to virtual reality. And it becomes even more complex when you're talking about processor stuff. And yes, I am somewhat simplifying this stuff down, but what Apple are basically saying is that there are certain technologies which Qualcomm own, and really they should license some of those standard essential patents to competitors, because without doing that, you're basically saying, well, the industry relies on those patents, on those standards, so everyone else is being kind of strangled out of the market. Now, once again, I am simplifying this a lot, and I would highly encourage you, if you are interested in this stuff, to do some Googling, because I don't want to make one company out to be the bad guy. I'm not, like, anti-Qualcomm or anything like that, so please don't think I am being like that, because also I can understand it from the other point of view. Because companies like Qualcomm, like Intel, like AMD, like Nvidia, create these technologies by spending not, a few bucks to develop them, but millions or even billions of dollars. And it's not just something that they can just throw money at and fix the problem. This is, in some instances, a company's life work. Like if you were to look at Nvidia and how long they've been pushing GPU technologies, they've been at this since, well, from day. They were battling out with 3DFX, with the Voodoo cards. And of course, then they, continued and added hardware, TNL, and all of this stuff. So obviously, it makes some level of sense for them to have, well, some vested interest in their future. The problem is, when things become too close to an ecosystem, it also strangles the market. So you've got to strike that fine line and balance. Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. As I said, I would highly suggest you do some Googling on this stuff, because I am vastly simplifying it just for time constraints in this video. So do check it out. I'll link a couple of articles in the video description. With all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.